So welcome everybody. I'm just going to start the conference screens as well. And it's great to see you all, some familiar faces and hopefully some new ones too. And welcome to today. We have an amazing lineup of speakers for you and a lovely subject about inspiring creativity and reluctant writers, something we haven't actually covered before, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. So I'm going to introduce us as usual. The agenda today, like I say, some amazing speakers coming up today. We have Lloyd for Allington. We have Tanya Ahmed, who I think is Dubai, aren't you, Tanya? Alison Riley from the Literacy Company. And, oh, beg your pardon, I can't actually see. So Sam Lenton from England as well. So, oh dear, beg your pardon. And Daniela, I'm sorry, Daniela, and Daniela, we have some amazing lineup of speakers we're looking forward to hearing from in a second. And again, I'm just going to, those of you who haven't heard about the Global School Alliance before, we are an amazing community, some fantastic people here today, an online community with a general vision of increasing educational outputs for students. It's a great way to connect and provide transformational experiences, but it's mainly for collaborating and supporting each other. It's a free community, and we have some great benefits for you when you join. So there's the Facebook group, there's the online platform, we have a video library of all these conferences. These are regular monthly conferences, and they're recorded and saved on the platform, so you can see previous ones. We've had some amazing speakers in those too. And you can connect and join online with all the members to communicate and do joint projects, provide some amazing immersive experiences for students, and look at global education in general. We've got a recent our promotion at the moment is obviously to encourage global student engagement. So I think those of you who haven't heard about this already, we are trying to get more and more engagement, live engagement if possible, by students around the world to share culture, to raise awareness, and to generally find out more about the world and the world you live there, your own culture as well. So there are various programs you can join, including the Sister School Partnership Programme, which is a long-term relationship between two schools. And this is exciting because we hope to start the travel again. So this would be involve travelling to each other's schools to have an immersive experience with peers and learning about culture firsthand. I don't think you can actually beat travelling around the world for developing its skills that way. But if you can't actually travel, then the next best thing would be to have a virtual school partnership. So using the platform, we can set up a virtual school partnerships for you, where you can collaborate using projects, get the students engaging live through Zoom and learning about each other that way. There are a few sort of interactive programs that we're developing that you can join as a class. For instance, the Student Interaction Workshop. We're trying to do an international week in June, where there'll be a live session with classes from Spain, China, France, or the UK, and you can zoom in to that workshop and find out a bit about the culture. And then in the breakout room, there will be a live session between the two classes to ask each other questions. There'll be a set number of questions, teach each other songs, but learn about each other face to face. There's nothing better than seeing the children actually engaging live online. And again, we are running our immersion programs again in October. We've also run them a couple of times already, the China and Spanish ones, where it's like a virtual trip. We have a live host based in Spain, based in China, and they will do presentations about local history and some sightseeing tours, learn about some of the crafts, traditional crafts, and actually do them hands-on. And again, there's another experience to do a tour of a school and to interact with the students from those areas too. So there's some great opportunities there to take part in. Please look on the platform for them, or look out for the newsletters and the emails that you'll be hearing more about those online. So like I say, we do have regular opportunities for conferences and things coming up to take part in. The Student Council is another fantastic one to get your students involved in, to give them a voice, to get them actually controlling what they're doing. So for instance, the Secondary Student Council, its next meeting is on the 12th of May. They're doing a project at the moment on plastic pollution. I'm really looking forward to their results, which they're going to share with everyone then. That is totally led by the students. We have a student leader, chairperson called Melia from Cambodia, 14-year-old, so confident and is amazing. And I think they'll be coming up for elections to find a new president for that council coming in the next meeting as well. And that on that day is also our What's Exciting in Education, which is basically where we will find some guests and some hosts who will share with you either latest technology, latest innovations, something that's exciting to them to share with you about education. Quite a lot of businesses in that. And then on the 26th of May, we have the Primary Student Council, which is obviously led by teachers, but the students are there in a group and they decide what happens, but liaising through the teachers. And that's really exciting too. We've got lots of projects. They've already designed their own logo. They have done a project about different nationalities in the school. And at the moment they are researching ways they can support other children involved in the Ukrainian war, which is fantastic. And our next conference like this one will be on the 26th also. So look out for that. Lots of exciting things to look forward to in May. And as usual, we want to try and get you involved and engaged. Please use the chat for any conversations, introduce yourself and say hi. And also any questions that pop up into your mind and you want to remember them, use the chat. But we also want your feedback. So the poll for today is basically a yes or no answer. It's live now. Please participate and share your answers with us. So basically want to know, do you basically struggle with reluctant writers in your classroom? It's live for a few minutes, so please participate. I think the answer is looking like a resounding yes from what I can see. Okay, if we carry on for just a couple more minutes, has everybody had a chance to share your opinion? I think so. Are we okay? Has everyone done it? Fantastic. Okay, could we share the results of that poll with everyone? As far as I can see, 82% of people agree that there is an issue with struggling reluctant writers in the classroom. So we've got some great speakers coming up. Hopefully will give us some resolution and some answers to that. Thank you very much for your participation in that. And like I say, we don't let you get away with sitting there with your cameras off. I'm going to give you a 2-minute warning now. Can you please put your cameras on, give your hair a brush, practice your smile. We want to have a nice, I'm going to actually stop sharing so that we can see everyone, a nice photo of everybody taking part. So if I stop sharing for a minute, can we all, oh, there's still lots of people hiding there. Come on, guys, turn your cameras on, say hello, let's see you. Fantastic. I'm glad to see people are joining us. Wonderful. A couple more minutes and we're going to take a few screenshots and we will be sharing them with the rest of the community too. I can still see a few people hiding behind cameras. Can't look as bad as me. Come on. 2 more minutes. Let's practice our smiles. Fantastic. Henrietta and Hannah, have I got thumbs up to carry on? Have we got some nice screenshots of people? If I carry on sharing. Okay. Right. Let's continue. Fantastic. Thank you all for participating in that too. So let's get on quickly to our amazing speakers for today. If I can introduce Lloyd. Lloyd, do you like to share screen? And I'll stop sharing, so I'll let you on. If you'd like to share your screen, introduce yourself and start us off. Thank you very much.
Unmute myself and get myself full screen.
Fantastic, thank you.
There we go. Okay, so I'm Lloyd Ellington. I'm a primary teacher heading into my 9th year. So I've been really lucky that my career has allowed me to work in a really wide variety of schools, from outstanding leafy suburb schools to requires improvement inner city schools that needed obviously quite a bit more support. I'm currently a year lead in a really large school in Bournemouth, a 3-form entry school all the way through. And I've got quite a bit of experience in developing teaching and learning. I've done things like deliver cross-trust CPD, I've done coaching, supporting struggling teachers, things like that. But I think for me, my personal passion was literacy, which is why today really interested me in terms of joining and sharing some of the things that I do that might help other people. So I'll get started. So we're going to start really quickly doing kind of like a really quick overview of things that I talk about being scratching the surface, and they're kind of mostly really quick wins and things that are really easy to implement and actually have kind of that initial impact that I think some people might be looking for. So for me, this is one of the key things from my teacher training, which you know, when I think I was trained at a point when it wasn't as evidence-based, and some of the stuff now I kind of look at and balk at. But actually the multimodal approach is one thing that I've maintained throughout my career, and that I think is really, really important. So that's things like obviously quality text, and making sure that the literature you're exploring with children has really, you know, high expectations and models what you're expecting them to be able to use as inspiration, but also to aspire to. I think for me, that the big thing about that is that allows you to have conversations, to pick them apart, to mimic and replicate using key phrases, things like that. And also, for me, is a really it's really useful if you can to link your reading and your writing together, so that quality text that you're exploring in your reading time can then be drawn upon in your writing time, and it just gives you more time to dedicate to your writing. I think once upon a time, reading wasn't quite as high in terms of importance. And I think we'd often maybe do 3 lessons a week, whereas in my current setting, we do daily reading and we do daily writing. And I feel that's really important, and that allows us to have that cycle that leads into one another. Then you've got other things, which for me are really quick fixes, are things like, you know, pictures and video prompts, which allow children to see a story and then be able to use that experience to be able to rewrite or to gain inspiration. Same with props and having things that they can investigate and have discussions around to develop that kind of process of constructing a story and taking ideas. The use of sound effects. So often, you know, we'll have visuals of, say, a rainforest, but then also those sound effects as well to give them more to hang the hat on, so to speak. The use of music, which I've done before. We've done a unit just listen to music and trying to create stories based on what that piece of music almost like provides you a narrative. And then the big one for me is experiences. We use those often with what we call hook days. And I know quite a few people have, I think, started moving away from those and almost criticizing them. But for me, the hook days are the bit of magic that really hooks children in. And we at Hillview and in a lot of schools that I worked at often use special effects. So apps like FX Guru, Action Movie app, things like Rad VHS Filter can all create kind of that extra element of magic. And so recently we did a dragon tag here. I've included one that I did a couple of years ago, actually. So you know, we found the egg on the playground, but that all became from a bit of CCTV and just with an iPhone. And again, really quick, this took us about 10 minutes to film and edit together. It just absolutely sparked children's curiosity. And then what we did was delve straight into investigating, getting out to the playground, seeing scorch marks, sketching the evidence, interviewing people, and that just then gives them that kind of gateway in and immediately starts to inspire them and get them excited. But for me, they are, in the majority, excluding things like quality text, they are just scratching the surface. And today, what I'm going to focus on is less on that and more on the things that I think will have the long-term improvement in terms of engaging your reluctant writers. So in terms of motivation, I did a coaching course and we talked a lot about extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. And actually my tutor was very, very scathing about praise, prizes, certificates and things like that, especially things like stickers and points and raffle tickets. Personally, I think they've got a place, and I think they're really important to bridge that gap between a child being inspired and ready to get involved and have the confidence to get pen to paper. And you know, I use these strategies, all of them, consistently to try and get certain writers to begin writing, because actually on their journey to becoming writers, just getting pen to paper can be one of the biggest barriers. And for some children, it's going to take bribery to get them there. But I'll come on to why I think that, while I agree that that's an extrinsic motivation that won't last if they're in an independent setting, I think they are almost like a scaffold that we can use at the beginning before we implement other strategies, which will allow them to do it intrinsically. So again, so rewards such as you know, praise, being specific about what it is that you're impressed with. Things like prizes, we use raffle tickets. So if someone's done a good job, we might give them raffle tickets, and then that goes into a draw. Certificates, I'm sure everyone does things like ours is called Wizard Learner, which we do once a week. Things like that for those reluctant writers, when they've shown that potential in a week, to celebrate it is really important. And I think communication with home, for me, is probably the biggest one. I'm going to share with you one of my strategies, which is probably a little bit strange and out there, but I think it's really, really, it has a lot of impact on my classroom. That's Stool of Glory. It's a golden stool that essentially, if a child, and I use it very sparingly, it probably comes out maybe 2-3 times a half term. And essentially, if someone really impresses me in terms of a shift in their attitude, or a shift in their approach to their learning, or if they've just absolutely knocked out the park, I kind of hold this stool up my head. And if you can imagine Toy Story, and it says the claw, I kind of go, behold the stool of glory, and the whole class just stops and says, oh, the stool of glory. And then we invite that person up to the stool, they stand on their pie, and I have a huge celebration about what they've done and why they're there. And that's followed up with a postcard. Now, unfortunately, I'm at school, so I haven't got an example to show you, but I actually got children to design the one that I use. But something like this, where you are making sure it goes home, and often I will paperclip or staple the piece of work to share at home as well, to really try and bridge that gap in them, those children believing they can do it, having confidence, and feeling like they're celebrated. Which is a bit, bit strange, but the kids absolutely love it. But for me, we need to dig deeper, and I think the big thing that I'm going to look at for me, and it's about that intrinsic motivation. How do we ensure that they don't rely on us to be their support network, to be their cheerleaders at all times? Because we all know we've got 30 children, and with 30 children, you cannot be a cheerleader for 30 children. Now, I'm really lucky that in my classroom, I certainly don't feel I've got that level of children who need to be cheerleaded on that regular basis. But I have worked in some really, really deprived areas where, in a requires improvement school, where standards were on the up, but obviously they were fighting against a legacy of underperformance. And actually, it's not possible to cheerlead a whole classroom of children constantly, and you have to move towards somebody doing it for them because they enjoy it, because they're beginning to get passion for it, that they're going to spark that curiosity in them to start playing around with the language and things like that. And I just think, for me, this is what the majority of the rest of the presentation is going to be about, because children need to experience success. And I think, for me, the biggest motivator and one of the biggest barriers to your children is that they will be motivated if they are successful. If they feel that they can do it, they will do it. And for a lot of reluctant writers, it's the fear of getting pen to paper, of getting started. And I think, for me, that all hinges on how you're supporting that child, how you're scaffolding to ensure that every child in the classroom is able to receive support when they need it. And my argument would be, and the way that we work at the school that I'm currently at, is very much a mastery approach of all these strategies are there for all children if they need it, because there's always days when some children who may not always be a reluctant writer can become a reluctant writer because, for whatever reason, they don't feel confident to be able to get started. So how do we set children up to succeed? And I think, for me, success is the #1 key driver in ensuring that children become creative and become engaged, and to accelerate children's learning is so important. So what I'm going to share is basically 3 kind of key strategies that I use in my classroom that I think has probably the biggest impact. One of those is use of picture books. Now, I have had some people criticize, thinking that actually, for instance, something like George and the Dragon by Chris Wormel is inappropriate for something like Year 3 because it is a picture book. It's quite limited in terms of the length. But actually, a book like this, the vocabulary is really nice, and what it does is give you a really simple narrative. You need a simple narrative in order for children to be able to replicate it. When we use chapter books, the problem with that is that that aspiration is so far away from the reality of what your children are going to be creating. And if you're wanting your children to create narrative, actually you need to present them with something that is essentially more attainable, that is still challenging, that is still you know, what I call a waggle, a really good example, but that is more like what they'd expect to see. And I do that by using tailored model texts that have age-related grammar and punctuation, spelling features that I want my children to use. And I've done this with things like George and the Dragon. I've done it with Lost and Found by Oliver Jeffers. And what it allows you to do is essentially take any picture book that's got that simple, often 4 or 5 part narrative with really simple events, and allow children to then mimic and replicate it. It also allows you to tailor it. So each of the sections that I've got there, there's 4 sections. So there's 4 points to the story. Each one has got an example of a grammar skill that I want to teach. So we want to recap commas for lists. So one of our sections has got that. We want to recap using inverted commas for speech. There's a section with lots of that. And then what that does is when we're teaching, it allows us to model it and allow them to use a similar structure of conversation or of listing things for them to use. And finally, carefully selected vocabulary choices. We're very, very explicit about the vocabulary. We spend a lot of time reading it, going through it, picking it apart. And then beyond that, we also ensure that the choices are transferable to other settings. So, you know, we've got things like scampered, things like zephyr, which is a breeze, things like menacing, because we know that they will often have a villain in their story. They'll be able to use that language. So it's being really careful about what you're considering. Another one of those strategies which links in from that is familiarizing yourself with that narrative. And I think this is presented in lots of different ways by lots of different strategies. When I started my career, it was what we call take one book. In other settings, it's been things like Taught for Writing. And again, it is about immersing children in a story so they really know and understand that story. With a picture book, you can read the picture book. You can read the model text that you've done. We would then think about also on top of that, breaking down that narrative into what I call story pegging. And I don't know where that came from because it certainly isn't my invention, but it's something that that when I was training, someone shared with me, and I've used it ever since, where we break down a story into its component parts. So for instance, when we did Lost and Found, we start with a section where a character finds a creature and realizes he's lost. Then we move on to attempt to get them home and it fails. Then we have the journey. Then we have arriving and dropping them off, but then realizing something's not right. And then finally that reunion. And that allows children then to slightly alter and change the characters, the settings. So it's quite original, but also have a really clear arc of where they're going. And then that innovation allows them to mimic, steal phrases, to steal structures, to steal openers and things like that, and get them to practice using really familiar language and phrases and techniques, which then you can allow them to independently apply. So we have a lot of opportunities where children are then able to write without that structure. But what I find is that those children who need that confidence building need that structure. It needs to be provided, because then they will get pen to paper, they will be successful, they'll see the improvements, you praise that, and then that then allows them, when it's coming to independent application, eventually to be able to draw on phrases, draw on openers, draw on even ideas and narrative structures that they've learned previously, but then in a completely independent setting. We also use, as part of the story pegging, what we call planning strips. So each section has that when they planned it is right next to where they're going to be writing, because that allows those children to have that planning format straight next to them. And again, that's a really, really important quick fix for those children, because what I found was that when children were flicking back, they found it really difficult. Whereas when they've got it right in front of them, it's right there, and it just makes it as accessible as possible. The final one is explicit modelling. And I think for me, if you haven't modelled, you haven't taught. And every single lesson that we teach will have a modelled input, unless it's an assessed piece of writing. And it's just, it cannot be overstated the importance of really explicit modelling to children, especially our reluctant writers. They need to have something to hang their hat on. And when you go on a shared journey where you've story pegged and you're story pegging alongside them and then you're using that, they cannot take it word for word, what you've written and modelled and the ideas, but it's much closer to what they will write. So that gives them the confidence and it gives them that scaffolding to be able to see something and then apply it to their own work. So they can steal phrases, they can steal openers, they can steal different parts. So for me, I've got a really clear structure of how I model, and this happens in every single lesson. And I think modeling this way and doing it consistently this way and explicitly this way means that children know where they are, and that feeling of safety, especially for you reluctant writers, is really important. They know the drill, they know what they're doing, and the joy comes from the different narratives, the different fiction that you're using, or the different experience. So we always start with a vocabulary check, and I'll choose around 6 pieces of vocabulary that I'm going to pre-teach before we then read a good example. The children will get an opportunity to talk to partners, decide what these words might mean using a picture clue. We come back together, we discuss those and just make it clear that they know what they are before we read what I call a waggle, which is what a good one looks like. Then we've got a really good example of what a good one might look like. We talk through this, we talk about what makes it good, we talk about what elements we might want to steal, or magpies, what we call it, because we follow a loosely taught for writing approach. And we really hammer home whatever the learning intention is, what it is that we're looking for, and where that example has done it really, really well. Then we go to a shared write, and this is where the waggle's gone. We've talked about those areas that we might really want to steal, and we've got prompts to allow us to then together as a group create another modelled example, because it kind of models how we can steal ideas but while still creating something new. And again, if you've looked at writers, it's really important, because what some of them will be too quick to do is just try to copy it word for word, which is why in my classroom, I never leave a waggle up. And one of the strategies I use is we'll on a whiteboard, we'll create that waggle. So through our shared write, we'll create a second waggle, what a good one looks like. Then we'll discuss what makes it good, and we'll highlight those features, circle them, and then we rub out the rest. So you're left with a very loose structure for those who really need kind of a step-by-step, but actually they're still relying on creating sentence structures and creating the narrative independently. But yeah, and then finally go to an independent write where they can apply all those things that we talked about, that we've shown, and that allows them to, it's just that kind of, it's all about scaffolding and making sure that by the end of it, they can be successful. Because if children are successful, then slowly but surely they'll become, they'll become confident writers. I've got a child in my classroom at the minute who came and started not being able to really form sentences. There were no full stops, capital letters. There weren't really finger spaces. He wasn't using his sounds. Now the transformation is massive because he's had a lot of scaffolding, and now he's able to work independently, show me every couple of sentences, but he's working completely independently, and what is creating is quality. In the end, to inspire children to get creative with writing and to accelerate progress and to foster independence, writers have to experience success. And I think the only way a child will be successful is if they're properly scaffolded and supported in order to be successful. And that successful, it's like contagious. As the success grows, that child will get stronger and stronger and get more confident. And it's like a snowball. Eventually, they'll be able to be independent. Whereas with the extrinsic stuff where you're praising, it relies too much on you and it takes a lot of your time. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, in 20 minutes, is exactly what I feel is probably the biggest influences on motivating my children, inspiring them to get creative and to accelerate their progress. If I can be of any help, I've shared some resources, and we're going to try and get some more done because a lot of people have asked for them. But I'm on Twitter as Mr. Allington, and if you've got any questions or things that don't get answered here, or if you've got requests for resources that I might have, do get in touch because I'm more than happy to help. But yeah, so thank you for listening, and hope it's been helpful to people.
Thank you, Lloyd. That was amazing. I think there's lots of inspirational ideas there, lots of practical advice. That has been really helpful. Thank you very much. If you're okay to unshare, we've got Tanya coming up next. If Tanya, thank you so much, Lloyd. Actually, I couldn't see many questions in the chat at all, other than thank you, and that was great. But we hope there might be some towards the end. So thank you so much for that. And Tanya, do we have? Would you like to share your screen and introduce yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Amazing. Okay. Cool. Hi everyone, good afternoon. I think where most of you are from where I am at the moment, it's a good evening as I'm based in Dubai. So I'll just give you a bit of background about myself. So my name's Tanya. I have been teaching English for secondary for the last 8 years. I'm originally from the UK, from London, but I've been based in Dubai in the UAE for the last 2 years. I've taught in a variety of school settings throughout London, inner city schools, leafy suburbs, and at the moment I'm in a British international school, which I'll speak a little bit about in a moment. Currently, I'm a head of English. I'm also head of year for year 7, year 8 and year 9. And I've recently been appointed as an examiner for the IGCSE Edexcel spec. I've also received training professionally in oracy, which is something I'll delve into in a moment, and active Shakespeare, which is looking at how to bring Shakespeare from the text into the classroom dramatically. My past roles have also included being a teaching and learning practitioner, where I looked at coaching, I delivered whole school training sessions, and I also worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company as their lead teacher, which was a really amazing experience. In terms of qualifications, I've recently completed my master's in addition to my bachelor's and my PGCE, and I'm currently undertaking my MPQ in leadership as well. So just a bit of background about my current school, just to give you some context about where I am. So we are Arcadia in Dubai, and it is a British international school. We're currently a new and growing secondary school, so we have year 7 to year 9, and we're welcoming our first GCSE cohort in September for IGCSE, so it's a very exciting time. We've recently had our first Ofsted inspection, which is called KHDA over here, and it went very, very well, so hopefully we are doing something right. And we are also an Apple distinguished school, so what that means is that we utilize lots of Apple technology in our classes to really enhance the learning journey for our students. So when I was asked to speak at this event today, and I looked at the theme of how can we overcome reluctance and inspire creativity, I feel that's quite a mammoth task. And when you're looking in the context of secondary schools, where we're trying to foster independence in students, and that really starts from the back from year 7 onwards, and especially at GCSE, this can be quite a difficult thing. So for me, I really need to break this down into 3 key areas that will help overcome this issue. So for me, that is freedom, familiarity, and focus, or the lack thereof, which I'll go into in a moment. So when we're looking at freedom, if we want to inspire creativity and if we want to have creative thinking, that's linked to free thinking for me. If you want your students to be able to think in a way that is creative, is inspired, it has to come with a lack of restriction and a lack of boundaries. So that's where we have the idea of freedom. And something I really feel encapsulates that is the following quote, which is, "I only write when I feel the inspiration. Fortunately, inspiration strikes at 10 o'clock every day," by William Faulkner. So what does this mean for us as teachers? Well, it basically means we need to create an environment where students feel inspired every single time they come into our classrooms and in our learning environments. And how do we do this? It means we need to strip back the barriers, ensure there are no restrictions, there are no obstacles that our students feel that they are being faced with, so that they can write creatively, write freely, and not feel that reluctance in writing. So when we analyze this at a deeper level, we look at the research, and a report that I came across was actually really prevalent in this, where it analyzed this issue at a deeper level, and it looked at what was the reason that students were struggling to write and why were they struggling. And it was looking at things like previous writing failure, fear of exposing their feelings, students feeling that writing is a mystery or it's a secret, something that's inaccessible to them. And what we get from this is the following takeaways. Writing then needs to be passionate. It needs to be something that students want to write about. It has to be authentic. So if we want writing to be authentic and we want our students to not feel that reluctance in writing, we need to ensure that those barriers and those judgments are taken away from them. So that means your writing rubric, your formative and summative assessments, those things need to be taken away. Why? Because if we then create this idea that students are writing for an exam or for an assessment, it's not an authentic writing experience. Therefore, they can't feel creative, they can't feel inspired, because we have already put a restriction on them. And that's where you get that stutter in writing because of that. So in order for us to really feel that freedom for our students, we have to take away these barriers and these restrictions, especially at secondary, because I know it's so exam focused, but this is really where we need to overcome that so our students do feel that freedom to write. As I said, it needs to be experiential, so something rooted in familiarity for them, which I'll speak about in a moment, non-confrontational and free from judgment. That could be from judgment from their peers, from their teachers, from exam boards. So just emphasizing that need for freedom and lack of restriction. What this brings us on to is familiarity. So if we want writing to be inspired and we want our students, firstly, to not feel reluctant, secondly, to feel creative, where do we get our creativity from? We draw creativity from things that are familiar to us, experiences that are rooted in our memory that then spark creative experiences, creative ideas, and that way we then overcome that reluctance. Because usually when students feel reluctance, it's because they don't know what to write or they struggle with the creative aspect. And if we actually rethink this and start to use familiarity and use familiar modems for them, this actually becomes a much more easier task. So I'm going to share some ideas of things that have worked for me personally and for my colleagues when I have also delivered this to them, and hopefully it will be able to help you. So my first idea is looking at film. Film is one of the most accessible, one of the most familiar kind of mediums that we have, especially for the generation of students that we're teaching at the moment. They're so comfortable with the idea of film. They understand the narrative, the structure, they understand the medium that it's in, and they accept it. Whereas a lot of our reluctant writers are also reluctant readers. So where they aren't reading and they aren't picking up how a structure of a story works, how narrative shifts and hooks happen, that's also part of the problem. So the way that we can reimagine that is looking at film. Something that I like to use is film stills. So I might pick a film at random or a film that they might be familiar with. In this example, The Impossible, and I've picked a film still from before, during and after the huge tsunami wave that happened. And what I've got students to do is write narratives underneath those pictures after each of those moments. Sometimes I might just pick one, other times I might show part of a film, stop it, and then get my students to write from it. And the reason why that's effective is because they don't need to think too deeply about it. The stage has already been set for them. They just need to continue that, and they then will continue that structure of the film. It's very, very easy for them, in the sense of if we got them just to write something from memory or something out of nowhere, this allows them to have something familiar to stem and base their answers off of. Similarly, as I mentioned, we are an Apple distinguished school. We use iPads quite heavily, and there are a few good apps that have VR technology, especially in our digital age that we are in today. A lot of the students are familiar with using VRs, and I love to use it in my lessons. So there's a great app called Nearpod. I'm happy to share it with people afterwards, but I've got a film still over here you can see with the underwater, and you can pick historical sites, you can pick anything that you want, but what it allows students to do is feel immersed and assimilated when they are moving their device around. They feel that they are in the scene, and that really helps them to understand how to write creatively, and it helps them to overcome that reluctance because they are already there. So it takes away the element of imagination because we've already given it to them, and from that, because they have familiarity around them, that creativity is very easy to stem off of. Another way that we can approach it, and that I've done as well, which has really helped, especially for a lot of my male students who really don't like to write, is working in reverse. Especially with our TikTok generation that we have today, they are so familiar with making films, not just watching them, but making them as well, making reels. So I've sometimes allowed my students to make a film or make a reel first about anything. You know, you can give them a directive or not, and then they can write the narrative alongside it or after it. And the reason why that's really effective is because they've already set the foundation for themselves. So to write it is a much easier task because there isn't that staggering start for it, as they've already helped themselves by creating a narrative without even meaning to. So it's more implicit, and that's why I feel it's more effective in that sense. If you aren't someone in a school that has access to technology, even the basic things work really well and really effectively. Things I've done in the past is using a collection of random props, having that there in the classroom physically, and asking my students to create a narrative that connects all three props. And the reason why that's also effective, it takes away that element of confrontation, because suddenly this becomes familiarity and there is no right answer. They can create whatever they want. So when we take away that fear of, is this right? Is this at an assessment level? Is this marking against the rubric? It makes it a lot easier for students to feel that they're comfortable writing about something like this. And it's something that sparks creativity quite quickly as well. Another idea that I really like to use is Articulate, which I will go into in the next slide in a moment. So if you're familiar with the game Articulate, it basically is having buzzwords on a card, and you have to, if you're the speaker, describe it in as many words as you can to get your partner to guess it. So I've used this in the class where, especially when you are trying to create creative pieces where they might be using linguistic devices, because at the end of the day, that is what shapes your creative writing, especially at secondary level. Using these Articulate cards is really effective because you firstly create a model. So when students are reading these phrases to each other and the other person has to guess what technique it is, they then feel that they have that model to use. They know what they can use in their own writing, and it helps to spark off creative thought as they already have some examples to go by. What I've also inserted is differentiated versions. So the one with the orange, green and red, that's for your more lower abilities, and in the blues and yellows, that's for your high abilities, that they can create their own examples of an oxymoron or a hyperbole, etc. So this is a really great way of hitting your differentiation for your students, but also overcoming that reluctance and inspiring that creativity. So my last point on this slide is looking at talking. So as we've discussed with film, as it's so visual and it's such a familiar concept, it's easy for students to write. It's easy for students to think creatively. But one of our most easiest and commonly used communication methods is speech. So when we verbalize things, it's much easier to put our thoughts into a verbal narrative than it is into a written narrative, even for us as adults. So when we're looking at talking first, writing later, that really fits in well with the idea of oracy. So what is oracy? It is, in essence, speaking and looking at the art of communication. But what I'm going to do is try to expose the link to writing today and how it can be used for writing, especially if you have students where English is not the first language. I feel this is super effective at that as well. So why should we use it? Well, it exposes the link between verbal and written communication, eases students into writing because it creates a foundation where ideas are easier to formulate. Discussions kindle creative thoughts, and it allows students to stretch and build their ideas further. So you may be wondering at this moment, how does that look like in the classroom? So there are a few different techniques that I have used. One that I really like to use is speed dating. So what I have had my students do is sit in 2 rows facing each other. One side is the agree side, one side is the disagree side. I have a controversial statement up on the board, usually something quite lighthearted, and the agree side must come up with arguments for agreeing, even if they disagree, and the same for the disagree. So I've had statements like the earth is flat in a room full of scientists, and I've got my agree side who have to come up with reasons why the earth is flat. And the reason why this is so powerful is because cognitively, they don't have a lot of time to think, but they do find very quick creative answers and arguments to these solutions. anyone who teaches will know students are very creative with coming up with lots of excuses and lots of arguments. And so this is something that really helps students to spark that creative thought and to start talking, because they don't have time to think too much. So it's quite quick. Another idea that I've used is if you put your students in a trio and you label them as A, B, and C, and you can rotate those roles as time goes on as well. But you have an agreeer, a builder, and a summarizer. And again, you put on a controversial statement on the board, or a discussion statement, or a piece of visual stimuli, and you task the students with agreeing with something that the picture either suggests or the statement suggests, then building on that with the second person and the third person summarizing it. And what this really allows students to do is have a validated discussion. So once they've discussed with their peers and they've shared those thoughts, it suddenly takes away that kind of anxiety about, are my ideas good enough? And it allows students to have a foundation, to also feel validated in what they're writing and established. So then when they then move that discussion into writing, it's a much more seamless and simple process. As I said, because they've already spoken about it, they feel validated, and then it's easier to push that into writing. And my last one for this idea session is discussion statements. So if you have a larger class and you want to use the whole class in this, you can have roundtable discussions, again, putting a piece of visual stimuli either in the middle of the table or a discussion statement, and you can encourage discussions with the students using sentence stems and role cards, which I'll show in the next slide. For example, giving a student an instigator card, prober, challenger, and again, what you're doing is you're sparking that cognitive imagination, because they have to speak in role of what the statement or what their job role is. So therefore it takes away this idea of it's me, I have to think creatively, rather it's now they're thinking in role. And so it's a much more easier process for them. And once they have those discussions, it kindles that creative thought and helps them with that reluctance. That very quickly eradicates, because they now know they have something to write, they have a model to go off, and again, they feel validated and confident in what they've said, because it's been established by their peers, by you as their teacher as well. And this is just some visual for you about what I've just spoken about. So over here, we've got the speed dating, so between two people. Over here, A, B's, and C's, so in the trios. And over here, we've got the discussion sentence stem, so a picture of the roll cards or some of the sentence stems, just to help frame those discussions, to really start off your writing tasks, and then you can feed into the writing really nicely. And my last F is focus, or the lack thereof, depending on your student. So when we are looking at creative writing, I said at the beginning that we need to have freedom. And that is true for a lot of students, nearly all students, especially taking away the idea of assessment. But for some of our students, they do need to have streamlined kind of thoughts. They do need to have guided discussions or guided tasks to really help them with the mammoth task of writing. So looking at the small steps that we can take to help overcome anxieties, we can use role cards, which can also be excellent for differentiation. For example, if you have a writing task and you have a group and you split up the roles, so you have one who's a linguist who might only focus on looking at language devices like your metaphors, similes, etc., and how they'll input that into the writing. Your vocab builder, who will look at how to push ambitious vocabulary. Your spagger, who will look at punctuation and effective sentence range. And then your plotter, who will look at the plot and the narrative of the story. And what this helps to do is break up the roles, but also play to the strengths of each of your students, whilst overcoming that reluctance, because suddenly it does not feel that the student is tasked with all of this, and it allows them to break it up. What you also might want to do is do spotlight focus. So instead of focusing on students writing a creative story, where there is a lack of focus, instead perhaps spotlight focus on one aspect. So for example, looking at vocabulary or sentences with color vocab. So something that's been really effective for me is this color chart over here. It's a very quick, simple and easy way to spark creative thought and to really push sentence structures with your students. So instead of saying we sailed across the blue seas, they can suddenly say we sailed across the cerulean seas. And using that new word and that new color vocabulary then sparks off so much more creative thought and actually inputs creativity into their writing. And it's a nice visual as well. A lot of students really like to learn new colors as well from there. You can also give parameters. So for example, story within 50 to 100 words exactly. And what this does, it takes the focus of creating a really great narrative, and it just puts the focus on, right, you have to write between 50 to 100 words or 100 words exactly. And you will often see students will just race ahead, write so much, and their problem is actually cutting down the words, not getting to the limit, because we're taking off that pressure of what are you writing, and the focus is on the content or the quality. It's not, it's just about getting them to write. And oftentimes when they're under that time limit, with the oracy, as we saw, cognitively, they think creatively very quickly because they know they don't have the time to think on end, which for all my GCSE teachers out there and my A-level teachers, this is something that's really helpful, as we are teaching them, yes, to write, yes, to think creatively, but to also write in timed conditions, which can be a challenge for a lot of our students. And alternatively, we can forget all of that, because some of your students might not thrive with having any kind of guidelines, and especially with having a success criteria. So you might want to just take that out completely, especially if your students feel overwhelmed with hitting everything off of a rubric or off of a success criteria as well. Thank you so much for listening. If you do have any questions, my bio and my LinkedIn profile is on the Global Schools Alliance website, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. That was, again, another perspective of secondary. Thank you so much for that, and lots of practical ideas. I love the as being relevant to students currently, like the film and the inspiration spots there. And obviously the confidence building. I think that was amazing. There aren't actually, I can't see any questions other than congratulations in the actual chat at the moment. So we'll carry on going if that's okay. And we'll go to Alison, who's coming to talk to us from Literacy Company. Alison, would you like to take the screen and introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you. I'll just share my screen now. Here we go. There we are. Okay. Oh, thank you. Thanks for having us today at the Global School Alliance conference. It's really nice to be here, and lovely to hear those inspirational teachers talking just before me there. I'll just let you know a little bit about myself. I am an English consultant, and I have been for 7 years now. We work in schools, very closely with schools on planning, assessment, moderation, subject leadership, all of those kind of areas that support schools with their English curriculum. We've been working over the last 4 years on a set of materials, award-winning materials, as it says on the screen there. We very luckily won a couple of awards recently. And we write materials to support schools with reading, writing, spelling, and writing intervention. I did used to be a teacher. I was a year 6 teacher for many years. I've also taught from year 2 to year 5. In fact, I've been in schools modelling lessons this week, so I've actually worked with children this week, which has been quite nice. And my passion is really about supporting schools to get their curriculums right. And I have a love of picture books as an inspiration for writing. So a lot of the things that I'm going to chat to you about today kind of fit with what Lloyd was saying a little bit earlier. I will just mention a little bit about who we are as the Literacy Company. We are based in the UK, in the north of England, in Cheshire, and we are a small team. We've all been teachers. Some of our members used to work for the LA, and then we set up kind of just as an independent company because we wanted to just help schools, really. We are, as I said, quite a small team. We've got 6 or 7 consultants that work with us, and our passion is to support teachers and to support schools and to support children, and just to make English the best it can be in schools. So I've come this evening to kind of share some of the things that we've picked up along the way. I'm going to start by thinking, these are my aims for this evening. I want to share some top tips with you for engaging and motivating your reluctant writers. I want to discuss as well about how to make some subtle changes to your writing process and to your curriculums, and also to look at the use of the mastery approach to support your reluctant writers. And that's where I'm going to start, really. A bit like Lloyd said, we love a picture book because A, it engages your pupils, B, it means you can get all the way through it while you're studying a unit of work, and C, it means you can copy it and replicate it. So that's the main reason why we prefer to use picture books. And we do advocate a mastery approach, so that pupils get that chance to kind of practice their skills, their writing skills, on several occasions, and get that chance to apply in a range of different writing. And I'm going to illustrate some of my points today through this lovely book that we really love using, because it's a true story written as a picture book, and a great one. It's accessible right across the world as well. It's an American picture book, but we use it in the UK, so I'm sure you'll be able to get hold of it if it's something that you think would be good for you. So what my first tip that I would recommend today is to hook your pupils in. So to begin without a heavy focus on writing, and to think about the speaking and listening and the engagement, and then giving them the real excitement and the want to kind of read and to write. And that's how you'll just see, put a little symbol on there. We've got a program called Pathways to Write, and we always start with a hook lesson, and that doesn't necessarily have a major writing outcome. And when we're looking at Queen of the Falls, we're looking at daredevils. It's a great book to look at character traits and inspirational people. So we're going to start by hooking our pupils in by looking at Danny McGaskill. And if you haven't heard of Danny McGaskill, he's definitely worth looking up as a way to inspire your pupils to write after this meeting. He is a BMXer, and basically if you watch his videos, your heart will be in your mouth, because he rides down the side of mountains. And I've put a few of his Instagram posts on there just to give you an idea. So the idea is we're going to investigate daredevils as a hook, as a way into starting to read Queen of the Falls. And then we're going to have a little look at the amazing daredevil that is Annie Edson Taylor herself, and have a go at kind of creating an Instagram post for her and talking about what some of the key words, the key vocabulary related to her feat, predicting what she might be doing, what might be happening, looking at this picture that's obviously a real life picture of Annie near from the time. It is a true story. It's a great story. It's set in 1901, and Annie Edson Taylor basically used to run a charm school, and it is beginning to fail, and she needs to make money. So she has this harebrained idea of going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. And this book is the story of her amazing feat. So that's how we're hooking them in at the beginning, by looking at daredevils. Then we want to tell them the why. It's so important to explain to your pupils why they are writing and what they're going to be writing for, and to give them a real purpose. And with this text, what we're wanting to do is learn about daredevils and the character traits of daredevils, find out about Annie Edson Taylor, read about her circumstances, and start to infer some of her motives through the text that you're reading, and then to write and roll as Annie. And eventually, what we're aiming for at the end of reading this book and kind of revealing it over time and practicing our writing skills, we're going to ultimately work towards writing her diary and writing role after her daredevil feat. So what I would be saying is, once you've hooked your pupils in, got them excited about writing, explain what it is that you're going to do and what the outcome is, so that they're really clear from the beginning why they're writing, who for, and what the purpose of it is. Then what we will be doing is really thinking about the language and equipping our reluctant writers with that wide range of vocabulary that's going to be needed to support the writing alongside this text. A couple of ideas I've put on screen that are just really practical for you to take away. So we want to develop a knowledge of what Niagara is like, and to get them to understand just how that volume of water sounds and what it would look like. So we would snowball. So working on our own, first of all, coming up with 5 words. So most reluctant writers can probably come up with a few words to contribute to a whole class kind of discussion, but start off by working on their own, coming up with 5 words, and then snowball with a partner. So all of a sudden then you've got 10, and then kind of work towards a full group. So you might have 4 pupils working together and they've got a real group set of words, which you can see, this is an example on screen there. And then you can ask them to kind of really see that and cross out the words that aren't as effective and choose the best ones, and ultimately then choosing a group selection of 5 words, for example, that then you can use in your writing. So that's a really nice strategy. This is another nice strategy as well for your reluctant writers. We love these character alphabets. I've obviously only put half on screen, it stops at F there. But the idea is that you present pupils with words which might describe the character of Annie, and then the pupils have to use their inference and work out and justify and choose and select, which is the more important skill really than actually having to sit there scratching your head thinking of words in the first place. So the idea is you work with a partner, you highlight which word in the A box is the most appropriate to Annie. If there isn't one, you can move on to B. So I'd be highlighting brave there and justifying why brave would be a good word to use. So that's again another nice tip for your reluctant writers, to just help support them with word banks, or just in slightly different ways, so they don't feel like they're just being supported with a word bank there. The next tip really would be to think about some key skills that you want your pupils to master. So the example I'm going to go through is looking at subordination and being able to use a variety of sentences, and also to use fronted adverbials and get the commas right after fronted adverbials. So if we have a little think about that now, we're going to use our vocabulary that we've worked. We're going to start by creating a simple noun phrase. And I would be doing this in a non-threatening way. I'd be doing it on whiteboards. I'd be doing it on post-it notes, something that doesn't feel like you're having to commit it to an exercise book. So coming up with a noun phrase like we've got here, a thunderous cascade of water to describe those falls. And then model how to put that into a sentence, a simple sentence there with one clause. So a thunderous cascade of water tumbled over the falls. And then showing them how to extend that using a subordinating conjunction. You can see I've got as on there, extend to a multi-clause sentence there. So a thunderous cascade of water tumbled over the falls as a spectacular display of misty dew filled the air. So build it up over time in those small steps. And then this leads me on to my next top tip, which is practice, practice, practice. You'd be teaching these skills here, but don't just do it once and expect that your pupils are going to become good at this. They've got to do it again and again and again and again. And a bit like you would in maths, do it for a week if it's needed. Spend the time on those core skills that you've decided to work on and repeat practicing those skills. And then what we would recommend is just give them the opportunity in short pieces of writing, short, familiar, repeated kind of learning writing activities. So ultimately we're going to write a diary at the end of this unit. So I'm wanting my pupils to build up their skills of writing recounts. So I might set tasks like a postcard, which is a type of recount, a short letter from a friend. Here you can see the letter is to Annie from a friend who thinks she's gone mad. And then some kind of news, you might want to look at a blog. There's a short newspaper report that's on screen there. But the point of this is that they can practice using those fronted adverbials and those subordinate clauses that you've been practicing as your skills. So that then when they come to write their final piece, they've had that chance to apply within their writing. Then again, I'm just reiterating what Lloyd said earlier. It's important to be clear and tell your pupils what will make their writing successful. So share with your pupils, we would call them mastery keys, and you can see we've got key symbols on there. Keep these to a minimum. As I've said to you, I want them to think about fronted adverbials, commas after fronted adverbials. I also want them to be thinking about paragraphing. And then the top one there, really, the audience and purpose for the writing comes back to these points here. So be really clear on what the mastery keys are. And you can see I've put an example on screen of how a school does this, so that the pupils know exactly what makes writing successful in this genre. And then give them that time to think through and talk through their writing before they actually write. And it's everybody has explained this evening. We can't talk highly enough about talking through your writing first. And we would suggest making sure you've got those graphic organisers or those pictorial diagrams to support with it. You can see here, this is for a recount of Annie's trip down the falls. You can see Annie getting into the barrel. She's being pulled along the river by a boat. Then the boat is cut free, and then she bumps along the rocks, and then eventually through the rapids and to the point of no return where she's going to go over the falls. So the pupils can talk through that story. They can label it, as you can see on there in the black writing, what the key events of the story are. Then you can get them to think, actually, my mastery focus, the one writing skill I really want them to master is a fronted adverbial with a comma after it. So I'm going to get them to put that on the diagram. So as they're talking it through, they can say, on the island, Annie climbed into the barrel. And then they can kind of have an oral talk through that process before they actually commit that to the writing. You can also see we've got hearts on there because that's obviously the inference building up of how she felt. So when we come to share that viewpoint in the diary at the end, we can see just how she's feeling throughout the text. So we're linking our reading with our writing. The next top tip would be supporting your pupils with ordering their ideas. So obviously this will help, but then you want to be thinking about those planning structures. And you might want to be thinking about doing this in a linear way, or kind of, as Lloyd showed, down the side of a piece of writing. But we would advocate using post-it notes because things can be moved around. And I think the problem for some reluctant writers is that sometimes they have too many ideas, sometimes they have not enough ideas. So what you want to do is help them to think through their thoughts. So to post-it note on a timeline the order of events and then allow them to move around as they need to is really supportive. And then this would then be translated into a planning frame. And what I would say is you cannot model enough. When you're teaching writing, you have to model it, but don't just get caught up on modeling the actual writing, the drafting part of it. Model your planning, model the editing to make sure that your pupils are really clear on knowing what they've got to do. So use a model text. Again, I would use the phrase a waggle, what a good one looks like. I've actually taken this from another text. So this comes from The Tale of Ali Pasha by Michael Foreman, because it's a diary set in the same era. We're talking about early 1900s here. So reading a good one, what does a diary look like that's set in 1900s? So unpick your model, then create a plan for writing your own diaries. You can see here, what are we doing in the introduction? What should we cover in the introduction, then the description of whatever the main events are, and then memories in an ending, and any thoughts and feelings that you'd want to share there. And I would be modeling exactly what I want to write, how to do it, use of bullet points, keywords and phrases to show your pupils how to actually plan their own writing. And then thinking about modeling the actual piece of writing itself step by step, and also using a graduated release, so that you might heavily model where you're in control fully as the teacher, but then you can start to take your pupils' feedback, adding their ideas in as they get more confident, and then working towards a more supported composition where your pupils then can have a go at working together with a partner and doing things on whiteboards, and then eventually working towards that independent writing. My last kind of top tip really is to consider, this is one for your whole curriculum really. For your reluctant writers, you've got to think about how you're building your knowledge and making sure that you are revisiting things that they've looked at in year 2, in year 3, in year 1, in previous years. And I've just put our long-term plan on here. Queen of the Falls, you can see here, comes for us at year 5, autumn 1, which you can see in the pink column near the bottom. But we've built up to that text by looking at Seal Surfer by Michael Foreman, which has a daredevil in it, a young boy who uses a wheelchair, learns to surf, but it looks at beaches and it looks at coastlines and cliffs. And then as we go into year 4, summer 1, if you look at the blue column, we would look at Where the Forest Meets the Sea, which looks at a river that travels through the rainforest, the Daintree rainforest in Australia, and lets you start to look at rivers. And then as we move into year 5, we'd look at Queen of the Falls there and look at rivers and waterfalls. So that geographical theme of water is coming through. And then just to show you how it would carry on into year 6, The Island by Jason Chin is a wonderful book that looks at evolution and inheritance, but it also looks at the oceans and the Galapagos Islands. So again, you're broadening that geographical knowledge. So to really think about that, how you're building your picture books up in English to support your wider curriculum and support that knowledge building. Okay, I am coming to an end now. If you want to think about this process a little bit more, it's something that you can use with any picture book, a high quality picture book. If you want to find out any more about this approach, I've popped my email on there, or you might want to follow us on Twitter. You can see at the LC UK, Literacy Company UK. If you want to find out more about our methodology or our units of work, which basically we have a unit of work for every year group. EYFS isn't on here because it's separate, but we do have a full long-term plan with units for a whole primary school, and we can help you support anything to do with your English curriculum. So please, if you're interested, get in touch. We do have a range of products. I'm just going to pop those on there. It's not so much of a promotion, just to let you know what's available. And a nice quote there: "Pathways to Write has transformed the way we teach English. Our children are more engaged, are writing more, reading more, and love learning." And we are developing our international community. I will just say we've sold this week our Pathways to Read program to a school in China, so it'll be nice to see how they get on. And we do have quite a few schools in Dubai actually that use our products. So yeah, we are trying to reach a global audience. Anyway, it's been lovely to kind of take part this evening and join in. And I will finish there. I think I've just gone slightly over there, sorry. But I'll finish sharing my screen. And thanks very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Alison, for coming along. And as you might notice in the comments, the Literacy Company are very kindly offering a free trial for a unit of work. Is that right, Alison?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So for example, the Queen of the Falls unit, we're happy to send, if you're subject leader or you want to try it out in your class, if you get in touch with us, we can send you a unit of work to trial. So yeah, we can.
There's a link in the chat you can use, and we can make sure that you get how to contact Alison, and we'll share your contact with you as well. So if you look at that, it's in the chat. Thank you so much, Alison. That was very informative too. And we'll move on now to Daniela, if you're okay to share screen and introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniela.
Great. Oh, sorry, wrong page. There we are. Okay, hi everyone. Just want to say thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to share some of my ideas with you all. Now, just a little bit of background about myself. I have been working in education for just over 10 years. My journey began in foundation stage, and for the last 6 years, I have now been working with I have worked with different year groups throughout KS2. I have led different subjects throughout time, such as maths. I've been a STEM ambassador from my previous school. And for the last 2 years, I've been working in Dubai at Capital School, and I'm also the head of English. Now, throughout my time, predominantly most of my experience has been working in schools of high deprivation and low aspirations. I've also worked with, obviously been in Dubai and working with a large number of children who have English as a second language. But I have been lucky throughout the last 10 years to have worked with many inspirational teachers and many fantastic leaders. And what I've found when teaching writing is, and I've reflected on the experiences I've had, is that these great teachers that seem to be able to get the most reluctant writers to put pen to paper and come up with creative and inspiring ideas always had three common kind of main ingredients, magical ingredients, as I like to call them. So I want to share that with you today. So they're broken down into three categories, as I said, and that's the teacher's approach, knowing the learner, and developing visualization. And what I'll do is I'll go through each one and explain what that means. So first of all, before you even begin, you have to assess yourself. A great leader before told me a good idea is to video yourself during a lesson and then watch yourself and see how you are performing. As teachers, we know we have to be performers in the classroom. When we live in a world where TikTok and visual stimulus is all around children, how do we expect for them to then sit and listen to someone if we're stale in our delivery? So we have to be the person that's the most inspiring in the room, especially for English. We have to share the stories of our own success and the perseverance. How hard was it for you to write and be successful? How did your learning journey go? I know for myself, I always share with my learners about how I was a bilingual, well, I'm a bilingual learner, and I can share with them the difficulties that I had learning English and how I then trudged through that to come with, you know, a successful story in the end. And I always tell them, you know, if I can do it, then you can do it. It also involves sharing the power the books and writing has on you. There's no point in telling children that something will work for them if you don't share how that works for you. So I will often share with them, where even if we're reading a paragraph in the classroom, I say, you know, this is really making me feel this way. And I am very expressive in the way I'm speaking. I have all the children watching me, and so have the teachers that I've watched before. The children are connected, they're hooked straight away because they want to be expressive and they want to perform just the same way that you're doing. So you're sort of their role model while you're in there. And you make it seem like nothing is impossible. And again, like I know many of you know, Lloyd and Tanya and Alison spoke before, it is about building the children's confidence and making them believe that it is something that they can achieve, especially when they're not immersed in a world where writing is all around them anymore. So we need to make them excited about writing, and that is the part at the very beginning. Yes, like it's been shared before, modeling is so important, but it's not just about modeling the writing, as Alison said before. It's also about expressing yourself when you're reading and modeling how you read and how passionately you read. And the reason for that is that then you create that kind of expressive narrative in the children's mind, or the child's mind, for when they're reading their own writing, they start to read it, and that voice in their head reads in the same expressive nature that you have promoted in your classroom. So they also begin to enjoy what they're writing. They're also beginning to think about how the reader might perceive their writing, or how the reader might take, you know, feel or have emotions regarding what they're putting down on paper. I always dramatize my reactions to anything that I do, and I'm thinking out loud when I'm building stories with them, or when I'm sharing ideas on how we can construct a great simile, or you know, a great setting. I'll think out loud, I will make mistakes, I will go back and I will say, you know, this doesn't make sense, help me out here, I've made a mistake, that's okay. And you know, you're building that culture that mistakes are fine, it's normal, we all make mistakes, but we identify them, we reflect, we go back and forward, and then they see that you're not invincible, that you also go through the exact same process that they are going through as well. We persistently make connections between the reader and the writer, and I know Lloyd was speaking a lot about that as well. I do that all the time in the classroom. We will read something or share someone's writing, and we will stop and say, okay, so how would this sentence make the reader feel? What do you think the writer, what was the purpose of the writer using that particular word as opposed to maybe offering a different synonym? We remove all unnecessary distractions when you're modeling. So for example, there might be areas where children are anxious, and I'll speak about this later as well, anxious about their spelling, for example, and that straight away creates a block when they're writing. So we remove that by creating codes or ideas that children can, for example, when they're writing, they can, I tell them often just to put a squiggly line under a word that they're not sure how to spell, and when they are finished writing, they can go back and check the spelling. The reason for that is, yes, it lets me identify how well they're being able to build their phonemes and understand the building of the word, yes. But what it allows is for that block not to happen, for children to be able just to write and the flow to be natural without anything else stopping them. And it's the same for when they're struggling for an up-leveled word. We are putting so much emphasis on vocabulary, and it's fantastic. We want children to express themselves, and certainly if we're being creative, we have to be able to express ourselves correctly. But when children are anxious or worked up about using a particular word, oh, I need to think of a higher order word, I need to think of a different word, it stops them from being able to continually write. So we also do things like you should write for them, write with them. And again, it's that modeling on the board, collecting ideas with the children. How could we improve this sentence? How could I make this setting more, how could I build up suspense in this setting? How could I give the reader an idea that the character is feeling afraid? And then, as I said earlier, obviously modeling your mistakes as you're going along with that. It's also about thinking about the feedback. I've noticed a lot of the really successful teachers, what they do is they use really relevant and specific feedback. One of the famous authors that I like is Shirley Clark, and she speaks a lot about that immediate verbal feedback that you give to the children. So having to think about how long is your feedback? Are you just saying, well done, this is great? Or are you specifically building that confidence, letting them know that they are being successful by pointing out exactly maybe 1 or 2 points that you used a great, even if it's focused on creativity, fantastic, alliteration there, or fantastic imagery was used in this sentence. Well done. Next step. Could you continue that throughout the rest of your paragraph? So really thinking about the type of feedback that we're giving is really, really empowering for the children. And again, we want things to be empowering and not overwhelming. So that comes back, I've seen some examples where children are given lists and lists of what they should do to be successful in a piece of writing. And straight away that creates a block. What it's doing is stopping the children. The children should be aware of what they need to do to be fully successful, but breaking it down into smaller steps, smaller amounts that they can work on is a lot more empowering, especially when they see that they're then hitting the progress and they're moving forward. I always tell the children to see it as steps, like you're going up a ladder. It's one step at a time. It doesn't matter where any other child is on their learning journey, it's where you are. So right now we're focusing maybe on using fronted adverbials to capture the reader's attention. That's our focus. Next, we will move on to something else. So with that, you're building and boosting confidence. You're making also progress visible. And if any of you have read the work of John Hattie, you'll know how important making learning visible is, especially when it comes to progress. Now, a lot of the time what I do is I host many meetings in my classroom where I will meet with, when I'm assessing or giving feedback, I will meet with children on a one-to-one basis, and we will talk about what was successful, what we need to work on. And I find that they become so excited by having this valuable time with me. They come with questions, they come with ideas, they even, they're getting really good at reflecting on what they're doing. But most importantly, they're having that time for someone to tell them, well done, you've made an improvement. You keep going with what you're doing. I'm here to help, you're doing an excellent job. Now, and again, then that leads on to celebrating the big and the small achievements. Sometimes I see a lot of focus on the final result. You'll have Star Writer Awards or a Star Writer wall in your classroom. And again, it's back to that, who wrote the best piece of writing. But what about celebrating the children who managed to use, 2 adjectives to describe that noun in the sentence? They've never done it before, but they actually managed to create really good imagery with that. So it's about looking at the small as well as the big. Then it's about knowing exactly where your children are. And I don't mean by setting them into your low, your middle, and your high. I mean each individual. We need to know where their journey begins, where their journey needs to begin, sorry. So with that, we know that, their children will come with cognitive and language barriers. But focusing for writing and creativity, we need to really look at the social and emotional barriers. The rest is a conversation for another day, but how do they feel within themselves? Are they confident? Do they feel that when they say something, it matters? Do they feel that their voice is heard? Do they have a fear of failure? How has their growth mindset been developed throughout the time in school or at home? I find sometimes a lot of the children are afraid to even begin to write anything because they've had, as my next point is, previous feedback, whether it's from their teacher, parents, or even peers that have pointed out, maybe the mistakes that they've made rather than highlighted the success that they've made. So what happens then is that children just come in believing that they're not writers, and every child is a writer, we know that. We just need to kind of unlock that part of their hearts, really, to sit down and be brave and write what they want to write. It's also, I call it the converting strength. So a lot of the time as soon as I have my class, I will give them a task that shows me how well their visual muscle is. So our brain, we know a lot about language acquisition. As teachers, we're taught that all the time. But our brain actually has many different functions, especially when it comes to a side of visualization, which I will speak about next. So what you're wanting to identify here is when a child hears a sentence or when they are reading a sentence, can they picture it? Because it's a key component to writing, and I will explain a little bit more later. Again, anxieties, are they focusing on other barriers? Do they have other things that are stopping them? For example, their spelling, knowing that they can't punctuate sentences. Have they been told in the past, maybe they've read a story to their peer and their peer wasn't impressed with it? How does that anxiety affect their writing? And then we have things like cognitive overload. We're all very familiar with giving children breaks in between writing and any subject for that matter. I know a common thing to do is even when children are writing an extended piece of writing is to let them write for maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then give them a break and let them continue. That's great. But what about cognitive overload when we are collecting our ideas to write? How much can children retain, sorry, I'll go on to my next point after. How much can they retain when they're thinking about constructing their story? They can have great ideas, and that's why talking about your ideas is fantastic, because it helps to sort of embed it into our mind and hold it into the memory for a lot longer. But when they come to writing, they've collected so many ideas that often they feel overwhelmed, and then they cannot put it down on paper. So we need to think about how we plan for writing, how we give children time to come back to their writing, to read what they've written. I particularly really liked, Lloyd, what you had with the planning at the side of, on the margin of where the children were writing. That I think that's really effective. And again, the stamina, how long can they stay focused? There's a lot out there about reading stamina. But what about writing stamina? For how long can they keep that idea in their mind when they are writing? So again, that's where planning comes in. We're taking time to stop and to think. And whilst you've been modeling how you write a sentence, before you begin your next one, you look back, you reflect, you think, does this make sense? How does it come across to the reader? You are modeling to them how you build your own stamina. So we encourage those techniques for children to do the same thing so that they're constantly going back, reflecting, and then writing. And then you can use obviously your context. Where are you? What experiences have children had? And I know this has been spoken about before, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but you can use what you have around you as a kind of trampoline to begin with. Creativity is really hard when you don't have a lot of experiences. I've worked with children before who came from a small town, have never left that small town or even the small village that they left, so where they lived in. So when you were asking them to write about, a suspense story with a setting of a forest, or when you are maybe looking at mountains and the sea, or even as simple as a trip to the swimming baths, they were unable to write about it because they'd never experienced it. And I know Tanya had spoke a lot about that, so I'm sure everyone understands what I mean by this. So you can use something around them that they're familiar with to build their confidence, first of all, to start writing and allow them to free flow write, removing all of those anxieties and anything that could be a barrier. And then from there, once you've started building the confidence and making them believe that what they write and what they say is important and valuable, then you can start expanding onto other areas and using, whether it's technology or other stimulus, to help fill them with more experiences so that they can write on a broader term. And then obviously using their interests as well. I often at the beginning of the year, I will, I'm sure you all do, we do a kind of questionnaire or a Q&A with the children, and everybody will share what they like, what they do outside of school. I tend to collate that. And then my first term revolves around ideas that captivate the children. I have one child, for example, that his only interest is in playing the drums. So we created, I made a model text, and I created a story about a boy that was a really good drummer. From that, he was able to then take that he really wanted to write from his experience, and it gave him some kind of inspiration. And it was great to see him putting pen to paper and writing and sharing his experience with someone else. But it also allowed other children around who love music or are interested in different musical instruments to also get involved. It's a beginning, is what I'm saying, not an end. And then very importantly is your cross-curricular links. And that's something that I've learned a lot throughout the years, is having, whether in your school, whether you are responsible for all the subjects that you teach, or whether you are in a school where you're sharing maybe art and technology with specialists, it's about having an open curriculum where everybody is working together. So you can have cross-curricular links and interdisciplinary links. And that is where everyone is aware what your English topic, what your English focus is set around. And then you can pull other strands from around your curriculum to be able to provide more context for the children, to provide more experiences and language that can then be filtered into their writing. Oh, sorry. There we go. Okay, I went too far. Sorry, guys. Technology does not like me. Okay, so then the last point, and the part that I really, really believe in, is that your mind must see before it can write. We definitely need to always push the importance of talking before writing, but the visual aspect is incredibly important. And this is where that interdisciplinary experience comes in. What I find is that a lot of the children, they will give you vocabulary, they will throw vocabulary at you, and they will write, they will try and write extensive pieces with lots of words, but they have no idea what that word means deeply, what visual impact does it have on the reader. So there is where you can use art, for example, or vocabulary building. You can see me dressed up there. I'll come in one day dressed up as a word, and then they can visually see what that word looks like. I will encourage the rest of my class to do the same, and we will build stories based on the words that we have. But now, for example, the one where I have bin bags around me, I'm repugnant. So now they understand deeply, what does that word look like to the reader? What effect is it giving to the reader when you're writing? So they want to give that effect to the reader. They want to do that. You can use technology, for example, where we would then look at, for the one here that we have. I keep pointing towards the screen as if you can see me, I'm sorry. But we built, the children were in writing, they were looking at they were looking at settings. And we were describing kind of shabby homes, and they built their own home in technology, looking at different structural elements, and obviously finding out that triangle is the best structure. But from that, they built a home for a visual element, a visual home for their story. And it led on to then discussing, okay, how would we describe this? And we'll put sticky notes all around it, and they will have a kind of their own personalized word bank that means something to them. So when they're writing, they can visually see it. They're hearing that narrative voice that you have built with them. They're learning how to go back and forwards in their writing every time they construct something, but they can also see now what impact that is given to the reader. And I've put some other ideas. I know I'm a little bit over in time, so I don't want to continue taking up any more time, but there's more ideas there. I'm sure this will be shared, but just want to highlight that focus visualization in particular. And that is when you have the time to read with the children and then ask them, for example, if they've read something, what visual picture does it create for you? And what you can see there is whether they do have that visual eye, how strong it is, and whether they're identifying the key words in the language and the picture it creates in their mind. You can have two learners together, each writing a small script on a character description, for example, and reading it back to their partner, where their partner has to draw the image of what they see in their eye. And then they share back what they had, identifying, okay, maybe I should have expressed it in this way and it would have created this image, or that was really well explained. It allowed me to understand that your character was dressed in 5 different colors and maybe was the most flamboyant person in the room. So as you can see, for me, this would be the 3 components that I would advise anyone. If you really want to inspire creativity, this is where you have to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Again, I love a different aspect of it, the fact that it comes from you, the teacher inspired. Okay, you're sort of structuring it, but I love the fact that it comes out of you. And the cross-curricular links, that's another one I hadn't thought about, and it's brilliant. And I love the idea of getting someone to write or draw what you're saying, speaking to them, and they've got to write. So how you describe it, I think that's a fantastic a way of encouraging them to do it, using all your senses. Thank you so much for that. That's been a fantastic input. Again, all we've got is thank yous in the comments. We don't seem to have many questions coming up, so I'll go on ahead, because I know Sam has just joined us, who's been busy teaching and is rushing in after teaching. So Sam, welcome. Would you like to share the screen and introduce yourself?
Absolutely, thank you very much. Okay, let me just get my screen up.
Perfect, thank you.
And here we go. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everybody. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow Daniela after that fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. And as Tony says, I've been teaching this afternoon, teaching poetry, so it's wonderful to actually have been in the midst of teaching English and then be over here with you, ready to share some thoughts about creativity. I'm currently head of English at Wycombe Abbey, which is a big boarding school in England. And I've had experience of a whole range of schools in my career. So I started off in the massive comprehensive in Gosport, 2,500 pupils, wide range of ability. I've worked in a state sixth form where a lot of people were taking their GCSEs again after not getting a grade that qualifies as a pass in England. And then I've moved into the independent sector in recent years. I absolutely love exploring literature, and my belief is that literature is really the foundation for everything that we do. A lot of my ideas, as you'll see, stem from a literary approach and the reading that we do that ultimately leads to great writing. So I'd like to begin with a door. This is a door I love to show classes. I've used this image many, many times. It's full for me of potential, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to put across. This concept that there is a door that we can open up, that we can step through, that we can see the possibilities that lie beyond. I'm going to talk to you about how I use this door in a moment, but just to describe perhaps why I like this image so much and how it can be used to symbolize this whole idea of inspiring creativity. You've got a very clear structure around the wall, a very solid, grey, imposing wall that seemingly has created a barrier. There's a different side that we can't currently see, we can't currently access, and yet the door has now been slightly opened. There's a possibility of going through this pathway and discovering something. But notice the left side of the door. There was a bolt at the top, there's a bolt at the bottom. For some reason, this half of the door isn't yet open. It is inhibiting complete freedom to walk through. We've got a square window on each side that gives us a little peek through to see what might lie beyond. We have a sense that there's a light that's maybe offering us something. We can see there's a tree beckoning us through. There's a hedge. There's the sense perhaps that there is a world beyond that's going to be inviting to us. And when I've used this image before, I've often talked to girls about this in terms of this idea that this is what we're confronting often in terms of our engagement with language, the world around us, seeing but not fully seeing, things that maybe seem off limits to us, something that seems shut, that seems locked, not yet open to us. What can we do to unlock the potential? What can we do to unlock the different ideas and to see the full image and then embrace the possibilities? When I've used this in lessons, I've often taken this three-step approach. We've gone for a very basic word association to begin with. I've pinged up words on the board like door, window, wall, green, etc. Now, we don't necessarily get the most stunning synonyms thrown back, but we get the principle that one word leads to another word. It sparks ideas. And I think word association is a very good entry-level activity to get people used to the idea of language leading to other language. And then on the back of that, we take a sensory approach and imagine ourselves standing at that door and work through the different senses. What are we seeing in that image? And we scrutinize the tiniest details, maybe zoom in on a particular crack in the wood and say, why are we noticing that? What's interesting about that? What do we smell in this place? What do we hear? What do we touch? And can you even taste anything in the air, or perhaps some sort of scent that's arising from any of the flowers or the grass, etc.? And then perhaps most interestingly, obviously moving into the world of creative writing, I'm at a static point here, but what happens next? What happens if I do step through that door? What might I see? Who might I encounter? Am I escaping through this door? Am I desperate to get away from something? Or am I entering into something full of hope and optimism? What is my motivation in that scenario? So a very, very basic image with all sorts of possibilities stemming from it. And I think that is often a very powerful way to work with something that is familiar, but something that has potential. And that's where I'm going to go for my second idea, this concept that anything ultimately can be interesting. Classrooms are cluttered with uninteresting things, mundane things, things that you wouldn't think you could really write a big story about. There are plug sockets on the walls, there are hole punchers, there are staplers, there's all sorts of things that don't immediately strike you as the basis for a story. But something I've done a few times, particularly this year, that's been very effective is asking pupils to look around the room and choose an object just like a hole punch and to do a 3-step description of it. So what is it literally? Hold it up, look at it, take the shape, the size, the color, really think about the language you could use to talk about what it actually is. What about metaphorically? What perhaps can you imagine that representing? What does it make you picture? What does it make you think of? What could it also be if it wasn't what it literally is? And then the extra step to go towards some creative writing is to be thinking about the relationship potentially between any of these objects, or what might a person do with one of those objects? What might happen if somebody encountered it in a particular way? So you can imagine the potential direction some of these things go when we're looking at the common classroom items around. And it's the sort of thing that's so simple of just beginning with what is there in front of you. We did an activity the other day as well of trying to sell somebody an object from your pencil case. So just taking something out of a bag and making a case for why this was something that was so fascinating, finding different ways of praising it, finding ways of looking at it in comparison to other objects. So I'm sure that's something that we've been talking about a lot this afternoon, this evening, but just the starting with the basics, scanning around the room, spotting what you've got, and then speculating about possibilities. And collaboratively, we can do this to an enormous extent. One thing that I've always enjoyed doing is the multiple questions technique, particularly when we're thinking about character building. So this can be very exciting with a group where we're trying to get them to realize that there's no sort of bad direction to go in, that we can keep asking questions and generate ideas. So I might be starting with something like, okay, so is our character male or female? Male, okay. Are they old or young? Old, well, how old? 63. Okay, 63, they've had an interesting life, they've done different things potentially. What do you think their main job was? And then we build and we build and we build and we just keep asking questions, and we don't actually allow ourselves the time to properly think and doubt and get cynical about an idea. We use it to spur us on with that dynamism in the classroom. So we're thinking, actually, we're getting quite invested in this character. I like this character. This is interesting. What sort of name might fit that character? What situation might fit that character? What do we want to happen to this character? And it's amazing sometimes what you can produce in just about 3 minutes of a rapid escalation of questions. And then on the back of that, it's interesting to see what pupils might want to do with their character. What can you now plot out about a potential storyline that would fit that character? And talking of storylines, plot, of course, is the key driver in narrative writing. So what I've often done as well is, like with the items in my class, opened up the window, looked outside. We don't have a tree exactly like that image, but we do have a very old tree just outside the classroom that I've been teaching in. And so we start to imagine that something maybe has happened to that tree. Maybe one of the enormous branches has fallen off. Maybe we all need to get outside to the tree for some reason. We start with some simple observation, and then we build collaboratively a plot from that to consider what might happen. And sometimes it's getting very silly, of course, but that's absolutely fine, because it's about the excitement of plot development, of pupils chipping in and going, oh, well, what if actually somebody sits on that particular branch and then it snaps and there's an accident? Good. Who would then run off to get somebody? What would we do? What if a dog appears out of nowhere? And it just sort of builds and gets more and more intriguing to then work together on forming those ideas. And I think collaboration is immensely important. It's one of the key skills that we need for the future. Digital technology makes collaboration particularly effective, but simple collaboration through questioning helps bring out the quieter voices and the shyer characters to realize that their little idea can contribute to something much bigger and have an enormous impact. Talking about literature and the impact that literature can have, one of my favorite poems to use in a class, but also just in general, is The Rain Stick by Seamus Heaney, mainly because it contains this tantalizing line that I would like you to think about now. The line is, "a music you would never have known to listen for." A rain stick, if you haven't come across it before, is this musical instrument, this physical object that actually is literally just this stick of bamboo, I believe it is, that then has grit and stones inside it. So it's not something that actually is of particular enormous sort of monetary value. It doesn't have anything in it that's particularly significant. And yet, if you turn it upside down, it creates the most amazing sound that does indeed replicate the sound of rain. And Heaney writes this poem about exactly that, and talks about how this rain stick is something, but it's also something else. And that's the concept that we're trying to get them to understand. It's about understanding poetry, but also understanding creativity, how something can be something, but also be something else because of what it's pointing us towards. How something can maybe sound a music that you would never have known to listen for. Would you previously have picked up a particular object or picked up even this rain stick and thought there was something greater than just the grit inside it? And I've always loved that line in terms of this idea of sort of a music that you wouldn't have even known to pause to listen for. And I think trying to create that idea for pupils that there's beauty in everything, but there's also things that perhaps you wouldn't have thought to listen for, wouldn't have thought to look at, wouldn't have entertained the prospect of engaging with. And yet, as this poem suggests, sometimes it is exactly those things that bring out the greatest ideas. And at the end of this poem, there's this idea of being a teardrop in the ear of the gates of heaven. I know, sort of a strange mixed metaphor, this amazing idea of something so beautiful that is then created from something so mundane. On a similar note, but switching to Dickens and prose, I love the opening of Bleak House. Many people may well be familiar with this, and it's an opening that I've often used for multiple purposes, because it is all about the power of simplicity. Dickens was a stunning 19th century writer, and he knew when to be simple and when to have a big impact with small words, and a few smaller words than fog. This section, if you don't know it, effectively describes London through the repetition of the word fog. Fog is in everything. I mean, the word fog probably appears about 24 times in a few paragraphs. It's this intensity of description. And you always get a reaction when you read this with a class, because in some ways it seems like bad writing. You know, why couldn't he have come up with lots of other words? Why does he just keep using the word fog? But it gives you that amazing sense of the overwhelming power of sometimes just stating something as it is, and then using that to represent the sense that he's so engulfed in this weather and this state in London that the whole place becomes fantastical. So fantastical that it wouldn't be a surprise if a megalosaurus appeared in London. And you have this remarkable moment where you think we're reading something that's very realistic prose. It's just Dickens' London. And yet he's talking about a dinosaur roaming the streets. He's talking about this place of great ambiguity, the place where all the people are merging into this greyness of one. And what I like to do with an extract like this is use it, of course, as a way in to talk about the power of good writing, but then also think about what can we emulate with this? How can we take some of those principles? How can we describe weather in particular? Often one of the greatest things to try and describe, to try and use as a basis for a story, creativity that comes from weather. Fog, of course, is all-encompassing, all-engulfing. So keep using that word to represent that. And of course, good old Christina Rossetti in her Christmas Carol decided to do the same with snow, didn't she? Snow has fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow on snow. No thesaurus available to Rossetti, it seemed at the time. No, just the word snow over and over and over again. But it works because it just creates that idea of layering on of the snow. We get it, we understand it. And I think this is important, that sometimes children can think that writing has to be something that is so complicated and convoluted and so much beyond their sort of normal frame of reference. And yet we have great writers like Dickens and Rossetti that boil everything down to the essence of remarkable simplicity, and then perhaps give us that little twist and surprise in the midst of it, like the appearance of a dinosaur, perhaps. I'd like to just move to the last couple of ideas by thinking about the role that technology can play. There are a couple of apps that are particularly prominent in education these days. You may well be familiar with these, but just to talk about some applications of these. The first app that you're seeing there is Book Creator. And Book Creator is something that is particularly prominent on iPads, but actually is cross-platform. It gives you the capacity to very, very quickly make a book through a combination of photos, text, videos, sound clips, etc. And one of the things that I think is worth considering here is how ultimately we build towards writing through other forms of representation. I was enjoying what Daniela was talking about in terms of visual representations through the dressing up of the representation of words, see art, and trying to think about how you picture words. And what I've always liked about technology is its capacity to shortcut processes to get people to be creative and then to provide the platform for text. We don't see technology completely displacing the writing. We see it supplementing it and in fact facilitating it. So maybe, for example, you use the comic book template on a Book Creator app, and you very quickly, with a few pictures, put together a narrative with these different comic book snapshots that then enable you to build something more extensive afterwards. Maybe with iMovie, that's the second image there, you can take some screenshots and put a commentary alongside them to be able to do a classic storyboard that you might do. I've done that activity before where we've recast a particular section of a novel, imagining we were going to direct it as a film. We've taken photos, we've thought about our different angles that we would do, and then done an audio voiceover. That again can get us thinking about storytelling in a more pictorial form and work out then how we would transfer that into the written form. And the third image is pointing us towards the world of virtual reality and augmented reality. And I know that some schools in particular have invested heavily in this, and the capacity to then visit particular places, to picture yourself in a place that you can't physically be in, so you can have that association and describe what you see as though you are actually there. And ultimately, you see, this brings me to the final thing. And I think it's quite good that this is the final point, because it very much echoes some of those things that we were hearing from Daniela before, and hopefully then rounds off this whole session that you've had today nicely. I do ultimately believe that there is an inextricable connection between reading and writing. And I think that how we read and how we deliver and how we model things as a teacher is hugely powerful. If you think about going and listening to perhaps a local band in a pub produce a cover version of a song, it may be okay. It may get you interested in finding out the band, but then you go and listen to the actual original performance. You listen to it incredibly well done. And there is a huge gulf in the quality between the bad cover version potentially and the art as it was supposed to be. think about somebody who's maybe learning to play a grade 3 piece on the violin, and how it's not something we necessarily want to listen to at every single stage of the whole process. It's not performed brilliantly. It doesn't actually do the piece justice. The piece is better than their performance is suggesting it is. And that's the role of the performer. And in many ways, as a teacher, then you can do a similar thing. You can be the grade 8 violinist who plays that piece and shows them how good the piece actually is. You can be the one who reads aloud the work and shows them how good literature can sound. I've had moments where girls have sort of been really sort of taken aback by something like a section of Jane Eyre that I've read aloud to them, because they didn't realize just how good the writing was until they heard it read really, really well. And I'm not saying that in sort of an arrogant sense. I'm saying from an experienced teacher point of view of knowing where to stress, where to pause, the pace to read things, the enthusiasm in the voice, the dynamism. And I think being able to captivate people to wonder at language, to realize that, wow, the written word can be as sonorous as the most wonderful piece of music. The written word can move me. The written word can cause shivers down the spine. And if it does that to you, tell them it's doing that to you. I've done that recently. I genuinely had that emotion as I was reading it, and I was feeling a tingle, and I was telling them, look, I'm tingling all over reading this, and it's only a piece of written work. How is it doing that to me? Well, because that's the power of language, and that's the capacity you have to elicit that response from people. So captivate, but then lead them to create on the basis of some of those ideas that we've expressed earlier, so that you then have the opportunity to celebrate. So you have the opportunity to captivate with their writing. And sometimes as well, it's amazing the power that you have to read somebody else's work and to lift it beyond what they think they'd accomplished, and to absolutely wow their own ears at the sound of their own writing. And it's a remarkable moment when you can do that, where somebody sort of listens back and goes, goodness me, did I really write it? Because you've made it sound perhaps so much better than they thought themselves in their own head it sounded. So, of course, it's not just about our own performance, however much we might be sort of wannabe actors or rock stars standing up the front delivering it. Of course, we want them to be reading. We want them to be performing their own writing as much as possible. But the modeling process and the passion and the dynamism is absolutely central to then nurturing that in them, giving them a sense that they have the capacity to create something that will cause others to tingle, that will cause others to wonder at the craft of language. And ultimately, that's what it's about. It's the ideas that are interesting, but it's also realizing that there's a beauty in expression. That's why we read well, not just in terms of how well we read aloud, but in terms of what we read. We read the Heaney poems, we read the Dickens, the Rossetti, we read good quality writing. Even if we don't study every detail and deconstruct it, we read the masters of the craft. You know, if we want somebody to know how good beef can taste, then we make sure that it is cooked really well. We eat it at a good restaurant. We don't just throw them any old bit of beef and say, well, there you go, do you like beef? We have the best beef for them. And similarly, if we want people to understand how amazing writing can be and why they should have the motivation to do it themselves, we show them the best. We show them the masters. We celebrate it. We speak it out loud well. We get them to hear the sounds, the lyricism of the writing on their own tongues, hear it in their own ears, in their own voices, in their own minds. And then we say, that's what you could do. You could do that. We celebrate what they produce. And hopefully we turn those reluctant writers into inspired creatives. Thank you very much. I'll draw that to a close there.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Sam. And I must admit, the speaker, everyone has been fantastic this evening and definitely inspired me. I would say if that doesn't inspire you to write, nothing will. I would say a great idea for that inspiration. I was thinking, because obviously we're talking to schools all over the world, it'd be great to work collaboratively and maybe share their views outside their window, like your classroom. Classrooms around the world, let's share our windows, and everybody writes about everybody else's window. I just think there's so much inspiration in there, and I can't thank the speakers enough this afternoon. It's been amazing. Does anybody have any questions for the speakers while we're all here? There doesn't seem to be many in the chat, but if you wanted to raise your hand, you could unmute yourself and speak directly to the speakers if anyone would like to join in. Come on, everyone's very quiet. But we're all awestruck by all the amazing information we've had this evening. Feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. Well, we've got the speakers here. You can speak directly to them. Everyone's being very shy. Oh, I've got lots of thank yous, but no questions. Come on, guys. You must have something to ask these amazing people while we've got them here live. Doesn't look like it, but all I can say is we have been here for, for a while now. So thank you so much for all our contributors. This has been recorded. We will be sharing it. I like to say the contacts. We'll keep this conversation going on the platform or on Facebook if you like. It would be great to hear everybody's input and to keep this going. And thank you very much. That's about all I can say, unless anyone has any more questions before we all say goodbye, good night, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. No, doesn't seem to be any more questions, but thank you everybody for being here and contributing to this amazing session. Thank you very much. I'll probably play us out with one of our lovely videos again to get rid of my face more than anything. So thanks everybody, and we'll say good night for now.